Once again, it's my pleasure to welcome everyone to our minyan this evening. It's so nice to see you virtually. Of course, we could really see one another in real time and space, but at the same time, as I've said so many times, we are indeed so fortunate that we have this technology that enables us to see one another on these platforms and enable us to feel the sense of our community as we gather together and maintain the greatest sense of normalcy that we can aspire to. And especially this evening, we're so honored to have with us really one of the outstanding voices of our conservative movement, Rabbi Bradley Artson, the dean of the Ziegler School of Rabbinics at the American Jewish University, which is the school where I began my rabbinic school career, where Wendy actually was studying for her degree in education, where I had the opportunity to meet so many of the rabbis, professors that first began to mold me and have touched me in so many different ways. And once again, we are thrilled to welcome Rabbi Artson to our community. He's been here a number of times. We're all pals now. He should know our congregation. As we spoke with each other on the screen at the beginning of our service, he already knows a number of members of our congregation. So Rabbi Artson, it's such a pleasure to welcome you. We do so knowing that you have distinguished yourself in so many extraordinary ways, graduating from Harvard, going on to serve our community in the political world, supporting many different leaders and causes in a way that touched you and I'm sure has continued to influence you. A prolific writer of books and periodicals, on a weekly basis, writing a Devar Torah on the weekly Sedra, always utilizing an extraordinary mind that is able to bring statements from a vast array of sources to speak to the challenges of our day. We are thrilled to have you speak to us this evening on the subject of inclusion, the subject matter that is so very important to our Jewish communities, let alone the entire world, especially this month of February. Rabbi Artson, welcome.
Thank you, Rabbi Weinberg. It is really a joy to be back with you. I'm sorry that I don't get to be physically in your presence and in your sanctuary. Please God, we will all be released from house arrest and be able to enjoy each other's company soon and in good health. But let me start by just commending you for taking care of yourselves and the people you love and for preserving the health of the larger community by sheltering in place. So kudos to you. Also to the Feldmans, Mazel Tov. I understand I'm crashing your party and you've worked really hard for this weekend. So I just want to tell you that based on what you read tonight, I think it's going to be a wonderful, wonderful weekend. And I bless you that in your life, this should always feel to you like home and feel like a source of real strength for you. So thank you for sharing the evening with me. Let me start, my friends, by offering you a story in the Talmud that always moves me. The story takes place about 2,000 years ago when the land of Israel was governed by the Romans. And the Jews had a limited autonomy. The Romans allowed the Jews to have a parallel structure of government that they supported, so long as we collected taxes for the Romans and we, the Jews, enforced Jews observing Jewish law and Roman law. And the rabbi who they appointed to be the head of this Jewish government was Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi Judah the Prince. And his job was to make sure the laws were obeyed, make sure the taxes were collected. He was the one who supervised rabbinic training and then made sure that rabbis were appointed in all of the cities throughout the land of Israel. And once a year, the great rabbi known as Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, would travel throughout the land of Israel, and he would go to some of the more distant cities and suburbs just to make sure everything was okay. And he would go with his number 2 rabbi, who was Rabbi Chia. They showed up at a town, and it was their custom whenever they went to a new town to say, is there a scholar here? Because if there is, we want to pay him honor by visiting with him. And the townspeople said, well, there is a rabbinic scholar here, but he's blind. And immediately Rabbi Chia turned to Rebbe and said, it would be an embarrassment to your office for you to be seen with a blind scholar. So I will go and I will bring your greetings on your behalf because we don't want to seem rude, but we also don't want you having to hang out with someone with a disability because that's just insulting to your office. And Rebbe, being a great man, wouldn't hear it. He insisted on going to see this scholar. Let me point out, this story takes place in the Talmud, and in the Talmud, we're never told this person's name. He's just a blind guy in some nowhere town. So he doesn't really matter much, does he? But Rebbe, being a great rabbi and a great spiritual leader, he says, no, I'm going to personally go visit with this man. So they go, and he meets with him, and they have a long and apparently wonderful conversation. And as they're leaving, this blind rabbi says to Rebbe, would you mind if I give you a blessing? And Rebbe says, okay, sure. And so this man says, remember, we don't know his name, you came to pay your respects to one who is seen, but does not see. So may you be blessed by one who sees, but can't be seen. And Rebbe is so moved by this blessing that he turns to his sidekick and he says, if I'd listened to you, I would have missed that blessing. You came to pay your respects to one who is seen but does not see. So may you be blessed by the one who sees but can't be seen. What this month is really about is about all the blessings we miss out on when we put our energy into who matters and who doesn't. When we try to create a hierarchy of the people who count, and then we come up with a list of the people who don't count, the people we shouldn't extend ourselves to, the people we shouldn't make an effort for, the people who disrupt our comfortable existence, or even worse, seem to threaten that they'll pull us down with them, well, all that energy gets taken away from whatever blessings we could have had as a community. And so I want to talk to you not just as a rabbi, I want to talk to you as the father of a son who has a pretty severe form of autism. I have twins, and my son Jacob is 28 years old. And when Jacob was about 3 or 4, we could tell in the shul preschool that he wasn't developing the way other children were developing. In fact, it was one of the preschool teachers who said to us, Rabbi Artson, I don't want to say something offensive or anything, but I think it's worth having your son examined just to make sure everything's okay. That was, by the way, one of the first moments that I learned that in special needs, the people who don't need to apologize almost always do. And the people who actually, well, they shouldn't say what they're about to say, for sure they should apologize after they say it, they never apologize. Right? So here's this teacher offering us something to help care for Jacob and apologizing for it. And we took him in and he was tested, and they told us that he was indeed pretty far on the autistic spectrum. And that changed our entire life. We have been working with Jacob to help him live a life of meaning and purpose. And I want to share with you a couple stories that are relevant to this. You know, one of the challenges for my family is that synagogues don't treat us like normal people, right? Because I'm a rabbi and I train rabbis and I write articles. So we were members of a conservative synagogue, um, and I'm told that it is now a wonderful synagogue. It failed us. Here's how it failed us. Jacob is, of my two children, the one who loves synagogue services. He loves Torah. When we would go on walks, Jacob would take twigs and he would line them up in parallel lines, and then he'd take a third twig and he'd go, Amen, and start making Torah chanting noises. Because as far as Jacob's concerned, everything should be about Torah. He once found out that there were summer camps that weren't Jewish summer camps. In other words, your kids would go away to camp and they wouldn't get to learn Torah or be in classes all day long. And Jacob said, well, what's the point of that? Who would go to those camps? So my boy is a Torah lover. He would go to synagogue with me, and there were two kinds of people in the synagogue. There were the people who would say, hello, Jacob, and then ignore him for 4 hours. And there were the people who just ignored him for 4 hours. The first Shabbos we were there, Jacob gets excited when the ark is opened. He starts jumping and dancing, right? Well, he started to jump and dance, and someone scowled and said, take him out of here. Apparently, we won't tolerate people loving Torah in the middle of our services. Don't let me catch you praying, right? So it didn't take that long for Jacob to get the message that he wasn't visible in this place. He wasn't welcome. Now, I want to say the rabbis there were wonderful. The cantor there was wonderful. We had and have many friends. But the place as a whole, the community as a whole, was so uncomfortable with Jacob's needs that the best they could do was pretend they didn't see him. And eventually, my wife, the Rebbitzin, stopped going to shul because she was so angry. And my daughter stopped going to shul. For her, that was an excuse. She would have stopped eventually, probably anyway. But the thing that broke my heart was that my son, the one who loves Torah, he stopped going to shul because he would sit there for 4 hours wondering if anyone could see his body because it looked like they couldn't. So here's a contrast of a different story. There was another congregation in Los Angeles, and they were starting up the Federation did a series of talks on special needs inclusion, like what you're doing now. And they had me be the keynote speaker. And I said to them that if you want to make a difference in special needs inclusion, you can't just have people who are neurotypical be your speakers. It can't be about them. It has to be with them. They have to be advocates for themselves. You would never have a panel discussion talking about the place of women in Judaism and have a bunch of guys. So you can't have a panel discussion on special needs where it's neurotypical people telling you what, like, that's not okay. So I volunteered my son. I said, Jacob would be happy to do a presentation at any of your synagogues. There were about 50 congregations represented there. Do you know how many followed up by calling us to have Jacob come to speak to them? The answer is 1. We got a call from one synagogue. We're starting a scholar in residence program. We'd like to have your son be the first scholar in residence. So I was doing a gig somewhere. For all I know, I was spending a wonderful Shabbos with you guys. And Ilana took Jacob to this new congregation. And Jacob wrote his speech out in advance because he knew he might get nervous. And he indeed got so nervous that he couldn't go in the room where everyone was waiting. So the rabbi read it for him. And that gave him time to calm down. And then he came in the room and they asked him questions. And Jacob communicates not directly verbally, he communicates with assisted typing. And so the kids ask questions, the parents ask questions. And walking out of the place, he said, this place is so wonderful. Why aren't we members here? And Ilana said, well, your father's out of town, and so I need to discuss it with him, but we're going to be, which, by the way, is all you need to know about my marriage, too. Um, so, so we joined this congregation. Let me tell you two stories that will epitomize this place. In the middle of services, and Jacob is still the guy who jumps up when you take out the Torah, still the guy who gets excited. And I get a preemptive stomach ache. Like, I'm so used to being glared at and being told to be quiet or to contain him that the minute he starts to peep, my stomach literally hurts. So Jacob, at some point, the cantor was singing whatever, and Jacob loved the song, and Jacob jumped up, and before I could grab him, he went running to the front of the room, right in front of the cantor and the rabbi, and he started doing full-on Hasidic dancing, yeah, like this, and I'm in pain. I'm in pain right now because I'm waiting for the defender of the faith to tell me how I need to leave the room. And I got him back into a seat, whatever, and I'm mortified and I'm waiting. And the minute the services were over, the rabbi came up and said to me, Brad, I want you to know, if we had just created the congregation for what Jacob did tonight, that would have been enough reason to start this congregation. That was the most spiritual thing I've ever seen. And what can you say to that? Friday night, they do a Kabbalat Shabbat service during the summer in the park. So we're gathered in the park, and then we go into this common room where they have services, and it's packed. It's really it's so crowded because it's a small room. We're packed, and we're sitting in the middle of the room, of course. And Jacob's doing all he can do to sit still, and finally he can't anymore. And right before they start the silent Amidah, Jacob stands up, covers his ears, and starts walking out of the room. But he doesn't walk out with the door that's right there next to us. No. He starts cutting through the whole crowd to go out the door that is the far end of the synagogue, covering his ears and at the same time saying, I be right back, I be right back. And the room has gone silent because it's about to be the silent prayer. Okay, my stomach does its normal ache. And one of the congregants comes up to me and puts her hands on my shoulder. And now I'm ready. I've got my force shield up, so I'm not going to be crushed by what she says. And she says to me, Rabbi Artson, I just want you to know that watching the way Jacob loves Shabbat reminds us to love Shabbat too. And so thank you for bringing him here. And I started to cry because where does that happen? And I said to Alana, we're home. And indeed, we are home. A year later, the rabbi was pregnant, and so she was having other people speak and give sermons for her, and she asked me to do it. And the way they introduced me, they said last year, Jacob Artson was our first keynote speaker from outside the shul, and he did such a great job that we wanted to take a chance on his father now. But here's the points I want us to walk away with. Inclusion is not just for people with special needs. Inclusion is for all of us. Because isn't it exhausting having to behave the way people expect you to dress the way people expect you to look the way someone thinks you should, to emote the way they tell you you should? Doesn't that suck your soul out? Wouldn't it be nice to be in a place where you're just welcome? Whoever you are, however you are, come join us, be part of us. Don't we all want that kind of a congregation to be members of? And all that it takes is not to have a committee that handles special needs. It takes everyone seeing it as their mission to make sure that everyone feels welcome, right? Because if everyone feels welcome, then so will the people who have disabilities. And here's the news I want to share with you folks. There are two kinds of people in the world. There are people who have special needs, and there are people who don't have special needs yet. But those are the only two flavors people come in. I guess it's possible there's a third category of people who aren't aware that they have special needs. right? But nobody gets out of here alive. Nobody gets out of here without at some point depending on other people. It's even wrong to think of them as special needs. They don't have special needs. They have the same needs we all have. They just require special ways of meeting those needs. So here's my plea to you as the father of someone awesome and wonderful who has struggled to find a community that could see him for who he is. We left a place because they couldn't do it. And we found a place because they could. We all want a place where everybody is welcome, where everybody is embraced, where however you are, they're glad to see you. And the only way to build that place is now before you're labeled as one of those people, because by then it'll be too late. So let me close with the following. Jacob is now 28, and he just passed an exam to be able to take a GED, which is a high school equivalency program. Years ago, we got him into a special school where they did give him courses towards a high school diploma, and at the end, they gave him one that wasn't academically recognized. Still an amazing achievement. And we didn't know how it was going to go down. Jacob had the robe on for the graduation, and they had a class of like 8 kids, all of them with different issues of ability. When it came time and they called out Jacob's name, he jumped up on the stage and he barged across the stage. We had no idea what was going to happen. And he took his diploma, and the first thing he did was he opened it to find his name, which I think is, by the way, good advice. And then he got this grin on his face, and he jumped off the stage and he ran over to me saying, "Abba, Abba, Abba." I was filming it on my phone, thank God, because, I was crying the whole time. But when he came up to me, I said, "Jacob, you and God have performed a great miracle," right? Because the stuff we think of as miracles, those are special effects. I live in Hollywood. There are big buildings here where they can split the seas and they can have thunder and lightning and a voice come down on a mountain. That's the easiest. That's special effects. But here's a miracle that only my Jacob and God could pull off. An autistic kid who all the doctors said, don't hold out any hopes. Don't expect him to be able to achieve those things. And Jacob wouldn't take no for an answer. And Jacob's mother, who's Israeli, for sure would not take no for an answer. And I believe in a God who never abandons any of us, who's always there, not doing special tricks, not doing magic, not breaking the rules, but working within us, inviting us to find the strength and the resilience to take the next step. And I believe that it was Jacob and God who walked across that stage together and did something extraordinary. And now I want to ask you to do something extraordinary. I want you to continue to build a congregation and a community where everyone who enters, whether they're walking or in a chair or someone is walking to escort them in, everyone who enters your presence knows that you're glad to see them. If someone makes a noise during service and you absolutely must turn around, put a smile on your face before you turn around. Jacob never forgets a smile, ever, right? Let's smile at each other. Let's welcome each other. Let's define each other not by the people who fit our definition of perfect, because someday you won't fit that definition either. And they're still worthy. And let's show that we actually mean it, that everybody is made in God's image, that everybody has the right to be present, that everybody is addressed by the God who shouted out at Sinai. We don't need an inclusion weekend. We don't need an inclusion month. Every day is inclusion, and you are all the committee for welcoming. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.